Hey everyone, it's Mox here, and today I'm thrilled to be able to bring one of my personal role models into the spotlight, Mr. Mark Spence, founder of Chisao Club in Sydney, Australia. Now, some of you may be thinking, who? Why have I never heard of him? Well, that's simply because the man likes to play it so low, he's practically beyond the range of human hearing. But today, you'll get to hear a little bit more about his journey of nearly 4 decades through Wing Chun, which I think is a rare one and worth paying attention to. Because let's face it, there are a lot of great teachers out there, and there are a lot of other people with great technique. But there are very, very few that have tested both the theories and the technique in real situations of violence, not tournaments or ring fights, but actual criminal violence. And Mark's one of those rare ones who have walked the talk. That's why, ladies and gents, he's the real deal. Mr. Mark Spence.
Hi, Mox.
Hi, Mark. Now, just to give everyone a bit of background, let's see now. It was back in '88. You actually taught me my first Wing Chun lesson, which I still remember. And that was at the International Wing Chun Academy in Sussex Street, Sydney, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. I started there '84 and I started working professionally 4 years later. It seems a short time, but I started training pretty much every day after a couple of months and continued doing that for the next few decades.
Yeah. And look, over the years, you've also instructed several of my friends who have gone on to become well-known Sifus in their own right, like Sifu Nima King at Mindful Wing Chun in Hong Kong and Sifu Kai Taylor at Kai Wing Chun in London, as well as the growing great school of students right there at Chisao Club, as I can see in the background right now. So there's no doubting your credentials as a teacher. But as I mentioned earlier, as a teacher, you're quite unique in that you've personally tested and refined your teachings in extremely violent situations. So while there are many topics that I want to get your views on, but let's not sit here until they find a cure for corona. We're going to try and limit it. And so I'd just like to talk about your views and experiences with violence and fighting and Wing Chun. And then we'll try and squeeze in some questions from viewers. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Fire away.
Okay, great. Now, about your experience, let me fill the viewers in. You've had 36 years of teaching and training Wing Chun, including directly under the late great master Chu Shong Tin in Hong Kong. And
Yes.
you've run Wing Chun schools in both Australia and New Zealand, as well as for years running your own security business. I saw you personally working the door in some particularly tough areas of New Zealand. And you also worked for businessmen who definitely needed close protection as their personal bodyguard, including an ex-Yakuza boss that saw you traveling the world with him to all parts. And, well, that's quite a resume for a musician, wouldn't you say, Mark?
Yeah. Because before that I was a musician. I left school at 15 to join a band, and I made a living doing music before I got into Kung Fu. I kind of realised really early on in life that I wasn't going to enjoy hard work, and I dropped out of school early to play, and then when I didn't become wildly successful at that, I picked Kung Fu as something to do, or it picked me really.
Well, I can't let that go. What were you playing as a musician?
Okay, I played bass. I started off playing in a sort of jazz fusion band with a whole lot of guys who were really much better than me. And I was self-taught, and I learned how to play from those guys, and then I went on to doing alternative type stuff. We actually had, believe it or not, on what was Double J back then, we had a #1 on the underground charts, the alternative charts. We knocked, I think it was New Order, off the top of the list at that time.
You knocked New Order. Well, okay. So, ladies and gents, he's going to the top
It was
of
the
my
alternative
list
charts.
here.
So we didn't make money out of it, but it was still something. I was still boast about it.
All right. Well, let's delve then into the world of violence that you lived through. And I want to read out something that you wrote on the Chisao Club page a few years ago. And in it, you were describing a particular incident in which one man had his throat cut open and another stabbed in the head. Now, you were working the door right then. It was you ran the team. It was your group of bouncers in charge of this club. Now, this is how you described it, Mark, and then I'd like your comments, please. And you wrote, after years of working as a bouncer, I had become desensitized to violence. At the time, I was probably quietly proud of my toughness. Reflecting on my attitude then, I now feel sadness and shame. A decent person should recoil from violence. Becoming comfortable with it is not something to be proud of. Just as nobody at a McDonald's conference wants to talk about cows as living beings, martial artists often talk about violence as an abstract. I find those who most readily espouse theories about how things work on the street often have little experience of the things they presume to teach. To advise people on these matters with an understanding based only on theory is simply irresponsible. Cocooned in the safety of their own school and encouraged by compliant students, it is very easy for a martial arts teacher to lose touch. It is important to understand just how horrible violence can be. Teaching people how to fight is a great responsibility. It is quite possible that a student would injure someone or get hurt themselves. Glorifying and trivializing violence is unethical and dangerous. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about your feelings there?
The terrible thing was that I did become proud of being used to violence. That's what happens is, at the start I was really scared, and you're always a bit scared, but you learn how to handle that. It was interesting to me. To begin with, the very first fight that I had to deal with bouncing was quite a scary situation. You know, I was thinking I was going to get killed. An interesting thing happened with that. I was scared and shaking like everyone does. My knees were trembling, and I could feel myself as tense as anyone could possibly be. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to move, let alone fight. Once the fight started, once we moved in, I thought I was no choice. Once that had happened, I was fascinated by it. It happened like in slow motion. I could feel my shoulders drop. All the stuff that I'd trained for happened without me thinking about it. The adrenaline caused me to relax. So, going back to your question, I became quite comfortable with violence, and for a while I was really proud of that fact. You still get scared, but you get so used to it that you just deal with the problem. Because I was young and stupid then, I thought that was a really good thing. Later on I realised that that's not how a human being should be. It's diminishing to accept violence in that way. I've got more respect for someone who recoils from violence rather than anyone who feels like they can handle it. And I have a real disrespect for people who are proud of the fact that they can deal with violence. One thing I learned was that I could deal with a stressful situation, and that was a good thing. I'm pleased about that. But these days, the whole thing of violence, I really hate violence now. I don't watch violent movies, I don't watch kung fu movies. I find it really distasteful.
If we could take a step back, please, Mark. Could you elaborate a little bit further on how did this come about? What part of New Zealand are we talking about here? Just trying to set the scene for people who aren't familiar. Where were you working? And to emphasize that it wasn't as though you had started, you were a bouncer who also learned a bit of martial arts. When you came to bouncing, you were already an instructor. So in other words, you had the theory down. Now it was really testing it out. So if you could explain a little bit, please. Sure.
To begin with, it never occurred to me to be a bouncer because I'm so small. And the way I got the job was that the guy from the local pub rang me up and said, we need some people to work on the door. He knew I had a school, I just moved into town. And I said to him, well, you need big guys, I'm way too small to bounce. And he says, no, all we need is someone who can talk. And I was broke at the time, as I often have been, needed the money, and I thought it'd be interesting from a martial arts point of view. So I took the job on as just one of the guys on the door. I found out later the reason they were short on bouncers is that some gang members, there was a bikie gang at that time, had pulled a gun on the other bouncers and had a shot at one of them, and it got so scary that a whole bunch of bouncers actually left the job. And he didn't tell me that. I heard about that later on when I was already working.
Where in New Zealand are we talking about, please, Mark?
this was in Napier, New Zealand. Napier and Hastings is where the Mongol mob started. If anyone's interested in the Mongol mob, if you Google that, hit images, and you'll see the kind of people that I was trying to deal with.
If I can be a bit controversial here and add that those who may have seen Once Were Warriors set in New Zealand may understand that there are some racial dynamics at play as well. Would I be correct in saying, Mark? So maybe you might also be thinking you at the door adds another dimension of perhaps aggravating things.
It worked the other way. Most of the guys who worked with me were Islanders and Maori people, and I got on really well with them. They're still great friends. It's like being at war with someone. But we'd have this system where if it was a white guy, I would go and deal with them first. If it was a Maori guy, they would deal, or vice versa, depending on the dynamic. But because I got respect from bouncers, a lot of them trained with me in my school too. That respect they sort of demanded respect amongst their friends, and so I was actually treated quite well. The race thing was never a big problem with me. I had more trouble with white supremacists. That's where they seem to be worse to me.
That's an interesting clientele at this pub. White supremacists and Maori biker gangs. It must make for some very busy evenings. May I ask though, you mentioned that some of the bouncers trained with you. Which came first? Did they come to your school and test you out, or did, by virtue of working with you, they became students?
They met me through working with me, and I just told them to come along and do some training. And it was great because I started off as just a junior bouncer, if you like, and I ended up becoming a head bouncer. Then I opened a business hiring out bouncers, and at one time I had 30 guys working for me. But it worked out really well because once they had done the training, they treated me with a bit more respect, and we always got along really well. And there was a great dynamic. The school was a really tough school, and the bouncers became, I think, not softer, but a bit smarter in the way they dealt with violence. What happened one time was, when I first took it on as head bouncer, the way it was set up, it was a dry bar and grill, and it was just a tough pub. So we probably only fitted a couple of hundred people inside, but we'd have 5 guys on the door and 2 guys inside watching for when fights started. And when the fight started, a siren would go off and we'd all go rushing in, all 5, and because you need that sort of numbers to deal with it. You'd have 7 guys working on a normal night. And it had a reputation for having lots of fights. And when I became head bouncer, the first thing I did was I started opening the door for everyone when they came in. Because we used to stand there with our arms and sort of staunch people as they came past. And so the atmosphere was that way right from the start. It didn't make for a good atmosphere. So what I started doing was when people came along and say, "Oh, g'day, mate," and open the door, it's straight for that. It only takes something like that for people to start to like you.
Well, I am now absolutely convinced that Patrick Swayze studied under you for his Dalton character in Roadhouse. It's time to be nice until it's time not to be nice. You should have patented that phrase.
It's like being a politician, because the other thing is, in scary places, even if you've got a big crew behind you, you can get in trouble. But occasionally I worked out by myself on nights when it wasn't meant to be too nasty. It would be me and maybe one other guy. And it was really dangerous, but I knew that if I did get in trouble, all the clientele, they liked me, so they'd help me. It's much easier.
So if I could ask, please, you mentioned your first fight, etc., and this is the great fear for many martial artists. All right, I understand, I've trained, but when it happens, the adrenaline will make everything go out the window, or the adrenaline will make me tense up. For you, it was the opposite. Am I correct? How did you make that transition from training to actually having to apply it?
It just happened. The analogy I use with the students is that stress doesn't have to make you physically tense. If you look at an athlete, the most stressful thing they'll do is go into the Olympics. And at that moment, they're feeling more stressed than anything else, but they perform better than they usually do, because the stress, the adrenaline that's produced, can be channeled the right way. I didn't have a method for doing it, and I was surprised when it first happened. I can still remember I could feel my shoulders physically drop, and all the things that I do during training happened without me thinking about it. I was just thinking, I don't want to die, basically. But as I moved in, once I knew I had to do something, then the adrenaline worked for me. It may be different for different people too. Some people, it may go the other way. I was lucky.
That is a very unique take, because Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, used to have this routine about people go to the gym to get fit so that they're fit enough to go to the gym. And a lot of martial arts teachers will tell you the only way to get good at fighting is to have a lot of fighting, even though most people take martial arts so that they don't have to get into a fight. Now, your experience would suggest that you don't need to keep fighting so that you become more relaxed, that it is possible to transition from training to fighting should you need to use it, because for most people it may be maybe even once in their life, maybe never, but it is possible.
Yes, I should qualify that though. So the training I was doing, this was with Nima King. He's one of the main guys I was doing with right in the early days. And I should say that I trained with Nima every day for 3 years, so I did help him with his training. But the main thing I did was introduce him to Chushong Tin, and Chushong Tin was the guy who trained him. Same with Kai. I helped him along the way, but I like to think that the most useful thing I've done in the world of martial arts is I've been a conduit towards Chushong Tin.
Well, let me just I have to correct that. Mark, you've been more than a conduit. I've used a lot of taps and public facilities in my life. I don't remember the pipes. You are much more than a pipe, a conduit. You have had a tremendous influence on a number of martial artists who have gone on to much bigger and greater things. So let me just correct that.
Thank you. So the training we were doing in that stage, Chi Sao Club started up as a kind of, my idea was for it to be a social club for international Wing Chun. And then it sort of went underground because the management wasn't happy with that. So it was almost like a street game. We'd hang out in my garage. Sometimes there were like up to 20 guys come into my garage, and we'd train after training at the academy, so from 9 o'clock through to 1 o'clock. And then we'd train all day Saturday from lunchtime through to 9, and the same Sunday. And I did that for years and years. I'll come back to what we were doing at the time, but when I mean years and years, and go back to Nima, he came every day for 3 years. And by every day, I mean, there was 3 Christmases in a row that he showed up. I said at the start, anytime you want to come along, just show up, I'll come down and train you, because he was so keen. But he showed up every Christmas, every New Year's Day, like it was 365 days every year. He was there, knocking on the door.
I think everyone knows that Nima's work ethic is famous, but the other side of the equation is your interest and passion equally was there. Can't dance alone. Well, actually, perhaps these days they do, but you were there as well on this journey. Same amount of passion. I think that, and we'll talk about the training. Unfortunately, I don't know if we have time today, but a lot of it was Chi Sao, which, a separate topic, gets dismissed as a training tool. But by one measure, you had said that, and this was years ago, you had clocked up over 20,000 hours of Chi Sao.
Correct. So that fits in with what I was just about to say, is that, you mentioned you don't have to practice fighting, but we were Chi Saoing really tough. Like people would have blood in their urine. We broke ribs all the time. We didn't hit each other in the face except by accident, and there were, a few chipped teeth and broken noses and that. But it was really, really friendly. There was we never had one real fight, but we just used to bash each other. So along with the Chi Sao, we actually did learn to hit hard. It was different from sparring. We were just Chi Saoing and then moving from Chi Saoing to striking, rather than, here we go, you're going to spar.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is different. And, I understand that from outsiders, it's hard to fathom. Now, you can't see this, unfortunately, but I'm playing a clip of some of Chi Sao Club and your sparring. Now, the remarkable thing for those who can see the detail is that your structure is always perfectly still. You're just doing minimal movements. It looks like you're playing, but at will, you are able to break and take balance and structure. Just absolutely drop people, move them. And what I'm curious is that how you've always been, or something that's evolved?
It evolved, and I got so that I could be able to do it after I started going to Hong Kong. I had an idea of it and I could do it to a degree, but things kicked off once I'd had contact with Chishongtun, but it was actually going there regularly where things started to really work, especially after the first time things changed, something clicked.
Mm-hmm. So
I was going to say, and the Chi Sao, when I'm moving people around like that, as you may have it on the clip, obviously that's not hitting, but what I found was that if you can have that control over someone's body, their balance and their arms, then you can just hit through. So applying the Chi Sao in fighting wasn't a matter of he's done something, so I'll latch him and trap him this way that I've done 1,000 times. What I hardly ever hand trap people, but no matter how strong the person was, I found, and they're all bigger than me, everyone in New Zealand's bigger than me, I found that I could punch through their arms every time. So I had a free hit every time, and I could stop punches coming at, unless I didn't see them coming, which, that happens too.
yeah, and that unpredictable side of fighting is something we'll touch on. But what you're talking about the ability to control balance, etc., being critical, and I sometimes use the analogy of the elephant, the most powerful land animal, so powerful and huge, and yet you put it on a ball in the circus and it becomes almost comical because the elephant's entirely focused on its balance. It becomes an object of humor rather than the huge, powerful beast that it is. And that, when I see you doing Chi Sao, you are putting bigger guys, you're basically putting them on a ball and just, they're there for your amusement. So
exactly.
Sorry, please go ahead.
And an analogy of Chishongtun's was what it should feel like to the other person is they're trying to push a beach ball underwater. So it'll slide everywhere and it bounces back at you and you just can't get purchase to move it. So the person doing Chi Sao with you, if you're trying to destroy them, you should feel like this thing that's floating and slippery and spinning.
That's excellent. I think that many people have a very a different approach to Chi Sao, but we're not really diving into it. Let's perhaps, if we can go back to the topic of violence. So again, to reiterate that you were able to make seamlessly through your great deal of training on balance and awareness of your own and the ability to take the other person's, transitioning into combat came relatively easy. Though you did mention fear and other things, of course, the first time, because after all, from what you've described, let's set the scene again. This is not a couple of, like most people have fights in the playground, bash each other a few times and then the bell rings and go back into class. These people were playing for keeps, and you mentioned, I think you've written about being on trial for someone's murder trial. There were people, the story you related in Chi Sao Club, I think the readers would want to know. One man with his throat cut and the other head with his head split open. Did they survive? They
both survived. And at the time, we were wondering if we'd lose both of them or one of them. Particularly, the guy with his throat cut looked like he was going to be okay, but it was the guy with his head cut open bled so much that just us taking him the 20 metres back to the pub, to the ambulance, he started to collapse. He turned white and started to collapse, and I thought we were losing from loss of blood. It was horrible. But they survived, yeah.
So may I ask, after those experiences, did you find yourself changing your teaching? Because what you'd been training and practicing worked. What did you take out of your experiences to refine how you teach? And it may not be in technique, it may be just approach to combat. If you could share that, please.
In a funny way, my approach to combat, from having done realistic stuff, became more abstract. I found that you would have experienced, you train techniques, if someone does this, you do that and all that. And I found I didn't really have reflexes like that from that sort of drilling, but the Chi Sao seemed to give me the reflexes so that things would happen. And further to that point, I did things that I didn't know were techniques. There was one example. Someone went to grab me by the throat, which people often do when you're a bouncer. And I did a move like this, and afterwards, and obviously went like that, then grabbed him by the throat and threw him out of the pub. So it wasn't a big deal. But afterwards, I thought, what happened there? And I realised it was actually a move out of a wooden dummy, which I didn't know that it was a technique. I'd never thought of it that way. But it came out because I was conditioned to deal with force in a certain way. Same as when someone's learning to surf, they don't learn to, if a wave does this, I'll do that, if a wave does this, I'll do that. They just learn to keep their balance and to not push themselves off the board. And I think Chi Sao done correctly, which means that you work on the relaxation, you get the correct shapes, you cooperate with each other and build it up, gives you reflexes that work in a fight.
So I'd like to go back on the threat, what the quote that I read out about how martial arts instructors tend to trivialize violence. You who have experienced it, why do you think that's a problem? Because, hey, it works. What do you see as the issue here?
The issue really is that violence is a terrible thing, and it should be treated with the respect that it deserves. In my experience, people who've been through a lot don't talk about it so much and don't trivialise it. And I can remember right through when I was a junior, there'd be guys who would talk like they'd been in every street fight in the world, and they would say in a real fight this happens, that, and they hadn't been in hardly any fights. You know? And I know Sifus, really respected Sifus, who would talk as if they were hardened street fighters, and I know for a fact that they had 1 or 2 fights in their lives. Okay? Not that someone should have a lot of fights to be respected, but one shouldn't pretend to be what you're not.
Well, this is why I have so much respect for you, Mark. You always go against the grain, and I think real fight, in a real fight. These are words that you hear in every school, not just in Wing Chun, but in every style. It's thrown around a lot there. But interestingly, as you say, I think that our approach to training is so that we never get in a real fight. Not almost like with glee, oh, wait till you get into a real fight, you'll do this and then you'll do that. That's always been your approach. So how do you counsel your students here? And there they are training hard. What do you tell them about violence and violent situations?
To be honest, I don't talk about violence. I don't really, maybe I'm sort of a bit missing something with martial arts now, is that I just teach them how to do the skill. I seem to attract people who aren't that way minded. They don't come looking for that sort of thing. They're not necessarily after self-defense. The health and well-being side of it interests me more. I sort of show, if you can do this, this, and this, but I don't have to counsel them. I don't hear people talking that way in my school, which I'm proud of.
Yep. Let me share an anecdote about the different types of people that 1988, as I said, you taught me my first lesson. On the way in, I met a bloke from the country. He was a big bloke, and he was about my same age, early in his youth, and we were both going to try Wing Chun. So we both went in there and we both had a lesson with you, and we walked out and I was sold. This was it for life for me. And I asked him, I forget his name, I said, hey, what did you think? He said, it works, man, but it's not for me. And I asked why. Put it crudely, he said, you're not going to impress any chicks with this. And he said, did you see the picture on the wall? He was pointing at the picture of Mr. Yip Man. He said, there's a skinny little guy, and then our instructor, he was so small. He said, mate, I'm not going to pull any chicks this way. So this ain't for me. Good luck with it. And yes, those who are superficially impressed by things don't see much in what you do. But I think those who do and can study really see the depth of what you teach. And I think that you talk so little about your experiences, hard-won experiences. Let me work in my obligatory movie quote. Under Siege, Steven Seagal, the captain of the boat says, if I had your medals, I'd wear them to bed. And that's how I feel about you and your experiences, that you don't talk about it much, but damn, you've got a chest full of medals. Hard won, and not something to be proud of, as you say. Anyone who's been to war is not looking forward to the next war. It's those who haven't who talk up, let's go to war a lot.
Yeah, right.
So perhaps that we could take this time to take a couple of questions from viewers who've written in. Just squeeze in, if that's okay with you. And thank you to everyone who's written in the questions. We won't have time to go through them all. Everyone who's written in, I'm going to put your name down here below. But let's start off with a question from Scott Hooton. And he asks, even though your external abilities are amazing, Mark, when did you become a student of Chu Shong Tin's internal method? Do you focus purely on the internal, or is there Do you focus on both, or is that even possible? I'm not quite sure if I understand that last part. But the first bit about transitioning more to an internal approach, if you want to call it that. What are your thoughts on that?
From the first time I met Chu Shong Tin, I'd heard stories about how you didn't have to be big and strong to make Wing Chun work, and that attracted me. But the first time I saw him do something, I thought, this is beyond what I'm used to, and I was sold in that way. And actually, Graham Kirshner came from Adelaide, and he flogged. I'd been training for a couple of years at that time, and he flogged all the seniors in the school one after the other. And I can remember thinking at the time, oh, this stuff really does work, because I'd seen demonstrations, but I'd never actually seen it in action with people sparring. So
his nickname was Instructor God, we used to call him, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was really impressive. I moved to Adelaide to run Adelaide, and I told him when I went there that the reason I'd moved, myself and the family there, was because he was there teaching, and he really took it on. So he started teaching me 2 private lessons a week for years, and he was the guy who first toughened me up. He was the first person who I was scared of getting hit by him, but I became used to it. And he was really, the training was hard, but I went back to New South Wales after 2 years, and I know that 2 of the most senior instructors, they told me later that they went in and confronted the Sifu and said, how come Mark goes away for 2 years and comes back and we can't touch him? Why aren't we learning the same stuff? So I owe that to Graham. And then I met Chu Shong Tin, but it wasn't until I went to Hong Kong and I could get a lot of hands-on that I understood. I remember the first time, because he was like, he was actually younger than I am now. He was 58 when I first went to Hong Kong. But he wanted to show me something. He said, hold my hand. And I held lightly because I thought, well, he's an old man, I'm not going to be horrible about it. And he moved me, and then I held harder, and he said, I can't really hold. And it was like a magic trick. I just didn't, what he was doing it still seems like something supernatural. So I was converted from that moment. And then on the first day, I think, by the way he touched me, he'd do things and manipulate the muscles in your shoulder and do certain things, which I do the best of my ability with my students now. And he could get me to do things. On the first visit, I could feel the weight being transferred to the ground. And I was really happy about that. And I said to him, I could feel the weight of my feet, because I couldn't even do that before, And he was totally unimpressed. And I realised later that was only half the picture. He said later, you have to learn to do that first before you don't send the weight to the ground. For a while I was under the illusion that's how it all worked. But from that moment I started, to me, I've always trained internally and being able to do it well enough to express it externally. Like I can fight with it. Or I could when I was a young man, I don't know about now.
Well, that's remarkable. You trained under Chu Shong Tin, and his approach to teaching you was very much hands-on, and that's something that you've continued, and it's one of the hallmarks of your school, and hands-on teaching. So you've never aspired to run a mega franchise where the only contact people have with you is a photo hung up at the end of the hall. You are very much hands-on. Is that how you continue to teach?
Absolutely. I mean, once again, it comes from my hatred of hard work. People are always saying, why don't you go and teach a course at a primary school and stuff like that? And there's various things. And my answer is, well, I might as well get a real job. I love teaching. It's like playing bass guitar in a band. It's something that I can just do, I do all day long. I don't get sick of it, and I always feel exhilarated afterwards. And I also feel that I can pass on the skill. If I can do hands-on stuff and do what Chu Shong Tin taught me to do with teaching, I can improve someone. And I'm not sure if I can do that without being in the room with them.
That you certainly can. And again, I'd like to clarify how unique what you do by hands-on teaching, not by creating a curriculum that others can teach. It's the skill from the hands-on you received that you now transmit on. You were able to, and I'll try and find the video of this, you were able to teach some students, including some blind students, to quite an astonishing level of ability. That's something I've seen other masters, high-level masters, try to do, but fail, how to convey to those people exactly how they should be doing or responding to situations. What you did there was really unique, and that was purely by your hands-on approach, correct?
Yes, and it's tied up with the way the system works, because what happens with the Wing Chun that I teach, that Chu Tin taught me, was that he said that Yip Man told him that there's three things. You remain upright, you relax your arms and legs completely, and you aim your force forward. Now, the remain upright thing, with blind people don't realise, with blind people, balance is one of the main problems. So when you're dealing with blind people, if you just grab them moving around, it's really upsetting for them, and they struggle with balance. If you walk around with your eyes shut, or you stand with your eyes shut, you'll understand that. So I spent a lot of, for example, the guy you probably saw the video of, Michael, he had trouble when I first started him doing the standing meditation. He had to have a chair to hold on next to while he stood there, because it was just difficult for him because he's blind. So standing still is even difficult. And by the end of it, he was walking easier, he could stand easier, his balance improved so much. And because I emphasised using the balance for the power, it all worked. So he benefited, apart from being able to fight and have fun with it, it improved his physical capabilities in dealing with everyday life.
That's remarkable. That's remarkable. And I've seen it, and it was just, I still remember when I first saw this, I thought, no way, there's really, really some transmission of skill going on here. We've got to try and push on, and I apologize for taking so much of your time. Just two more quick questions. How about here? We have a question from Pegasus 175. How do you move in a street fight while maintaining structure? How does everything not go out the window?
It's to do with moving, with keeping your mind in your centre. If you watch a animal, I used to think that animal styles were rubbish, and the thing that went through schools that we both went to is that we teach what for the human body, and it's animals, don't make sense. But if you watch an animal, any animal, they move from their centre, and that's where they have the power. If you think of how a chimpanzee would throw something, they don't go like that. They project it from there. A bear swiping something, there's this movement which is all delivered from there. So that's the way, when you move, if your mind's in your centre, you naturally move from your centre, so you don't lose balance. That's the big thing, is if you imagine that your central axis, your spine if you like, your axis of gravity, is upright all the time, and when you move, you want to grab the centre of that stick, that axis, and move it from there, so everything moves as one unit. And the trick is to remain upright, to always be balanced. When I say remain upright, you don't even physically have to be upright. You have to have that axis of gravity applied all the time so that you're balanced. Balance is everything in fighting, and that's what I found with bouncing and things like that. When a lot of bouncing is just throwing people out of the pub or moving people bigger than you. You're not always belting them. But I could do that because I was always balanced. It's the difference with someone holding their hand out here, they push that down. If I do Wing Chun, they can push down there and it feels like they're pushing down on my shoulder, so I can take much, much more weight than I could by holding my arm up. You move from your centre.
That actually raises a follow-up question I was thinking of. It's an excellent point. So balance is everything, and then what you do, the technique, is less relevant, because that leads me to a question. A lot of people have this understanding that Wing Chun is a striking style. Therefore, maybe it's not suited to bounce or door work, because you're supposed to restrain, not knock people out. And even though sometimes you may have to. Could you explain then, was it using that you were able to restrain or eject people from a club, people bigger than you who didn't want to go?
Sure, I could move people out of the club. I actually didn't use wrist locks. I used wrist locks one time and I stopped because there's this conundrum. So what I would do is, someone, if I didn't want to belt someone, I didn't have to belt someone, I could grab them and get them out the door, or I moved around like that. I never ever thought about using a technique. You just do what has to be done and techniques come out. The one time I used a wrist lock, it was this guy who was just enormous. He was twice my size. He was quite drunk, but he was as scary as. And he wouldn't leave. And I had the brilliant idea, okay, I'm going to use one of those wrist locks. And so I put a wrist lock on, and I probably wasn't that good at it, but I had to really hurt him to make him move. So, and he'd gone from being surly and uncooperative to really angry. And the guy's twice my size. I put the lock on him, made him move out the door, got him outside the door, and then I realised that I was standing outside the door, all my bouncers were inside, and I had this guy who was ready to rip my arms off, and I didn't know what to do with him. I should have knocked him out or breaking his wrist, which is not what you want to do. I was stuck there, holding him in this lock, thinking, what am I going to do now? And I ended up pushing him away and stepping inside the door again rather than having to fight him. But he went away, so it worked. I never ever did a restraining lock. That's because I'm not big enough to apply that stuff, and if I was more skilled in that area, maybe it would work. I'm sure it works for some people, but not me.
Let's move to a final question then. It's from Ray, and Ray's got an unusual question. He says, how has your experiences led you to loving your family more? How has all this experiences in violence and fighting, how has it affected you personally in your family life?
I saw some horrible things happen, as I say, as a witness in a murder trial. You just start to appreciate the good things around when you see how delicate it is. People can die, that's why in the most trivial situation someone can fall over and die, and when you realise that life is that fragile, it can just be switched off in a second, you start to really care about those that are close to you. I'm lucky that I've got a wonderful family too, which has made it easier.
I think you've, on that point, you in some of your writings on your Chisao Club page, and I recommend everyone who's not already there, get there. There's a lot there. Find out more. And in one of them, you mentioned, you described an incident where one of your students, who was a big bloke and very capable, I forget his name for the moment, he was a surfer, but a situation kicked off, he didn't see someone come up from behind him, and they put him out. Normally, it would be very tough, but that's your kind of point, that in a fight, anything is possible. There are no guaranteed outcomes.
His name was Nick, and he's a close friend of mine. We almost grew up together. We'd been mates surfing when I surfed. And he was tough, he's street smart, he was super fit, he was working as a fisherman at the time, he was really, really strong. And it just happened, bang, bang, bang. The fight started, and he stepped towards it, someone hit him from behind, and ended up on the ground. Straight away he got kicked with steel-toe boots, broke his shoulder blade, or the back here, completely broken. He rolled over to try and, actually he got kicked in the face before that, and all his teeth were knocked out. Well, there were a couple left, but he was just messed up. And then when he rolled over to protect, then he got his shoulder blade broken as well. And at the end of it, he was he couldn't move, he couldn't even get up, and we only found him after we were clearing up all the mess a minute or two later, and there's poor Nick laid up underneath one of the tables. It was horrible.
Well, as I said, Mark, you have experienced. Yeah, you have experienced what a lot of other people claim to have, but why I've always respected you is that you've never sought to capitalize on it or to glamorize it, and if anything, you now move even further away and rejecting violence as a way, even though you make a living in the martial arts. It would be very easy for you to say, like street proven and all of this kind of nonsense. I've never done that, and I'm very grateful to you for that, and I really appreciate your time. I apologize we've gone over, but perhaps if there's interest, I hope we can invite you back so we can continue this discussion, because there's a lot of other topics that I'm sure people will be interested in.
Great, yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks, Fox.
Well, look, so that's it, everyone. And I'd just like to say, anyone who's in Surrey Hills or in Sydney, or heck, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, what the fuck's are you waiting for? Get yourself down to Chisao Club, learn directly from Mark Spence. He's the man. So please, if we want to see more of Mark and we can keep this discussion going, I'll put the details in the comments below. Please go to their Chisao Club Facebook page, join in there, start badgering the man to come back and talk more, or hit the like here. We'll see what we can do. Thanks everyone for listening, and especially thank you so much. Mark, you do not know how important you are to me. See you again.
Thank you, Rox.